May 2016, Los Angeles, California. Mother made a desperate phone call. Her daughter was missing. No answer, no messages, no explanation. At first, it might have seemed like a simple misunderstanding. Maybe she was busy. Maybe her phone was off. Maybe she just needed some time alone. But her mother knew something was wrong, because her daughter was not the kind of person who would suddenly disappear. Just weeks earlier, everything in her life looked perfect. She had moved from Ukraine to America chasing a dream. She had built a new life in Los Angeles. She had a loving partner, and she had just welcomed a newborn daughter into the world. After years of hard work, she finally believed she had found the happiness she was looking for. But behind the image of a perfect family, something much darker was hidden. When her mother arrived at the apartment in West Hollywood, she found her daughter's car still parked nearby. That meant one thing: she might still be inside. She knocked on the door, again and again, but nobody answered. Then she noticed something strange. Someone appeared to be inside the apartment. That person was her daughter's boyfriend. She begged him to open the door. She called his name. She tried to understand what was happening, but instead of opening the door, he stayed silent. The window was closed. The apartment went quiet. For a mother searching for her daughter, this was the moment fear became reality. If everything was fine, why wouldn't he open the door? Police arrived at the scene. At first, they did not know they were standing in front of a murder investigation. They thought they were looking for a missing woman. But as they examined the situation, more questions appeared. Her phone showed activity after she was believed to have disappeared. Food delivery records showed someone was still inside the apartment. And yet nobody would answer the door. The apartment was occupied, but the person inside refused to speak. Eventually, police made the decision to enter. And the moment they stepped inside, they realized this was no longer a missing person case. The apartment that once represented love, family, and a new beginning had become the center of a horrifying investigation. A young woman who traveled thousands of miles to build a better life in America was now at the center of a tragedy, and the biggest question investigators had to answer was, how could a man who seemed to have everything, a successful background, a family, and a future, become the person responsible for destroying it all? This is the story of a relationship that looked perfect from the outside, but hid a terrible truth underneath. Before this tragedy happened, Iana's life looked like the beginning of a perfect American dream. She was born in Kiev, Ukraine, from a young age. She dreamed of a bigger world. Like many young people who grew up far from America, she believed the United States represented opportunity, a place where she could start over, a place where she could build the future she wanted. Iana was intelligent and ambitious. She studied hard and eventually earned a law degree. She even found stable work in Ukraine's tax administration system, but her heart was always drawn towards something different: fashion, beauty, and the world of modeling. Ukraine is known around the world for producing many successful models, and with her appearance and confidence, Iana slowly began stepping into that industry. Although competition was intense, she managed to find opportunities. She appeared in modeling events and started building a name for herself. From the outside, she already had a stable life in Ukraine, a career, a family, a familiar environment, but deep inside, she wanted something more. She wanted a bigger stage, a more challenging life, a chance to prove herself somewhere new, and that dream eventually brought her to America. In 2014, at the age of 28, Iana made a life-changing decision. She left Ukraine and moved to Los Angeles. For many people around the world, Los Angeles represents possibility. It is the center of Hollywood, a city filled with entertainment, creativity, and people chasing their dreams. For Iana, it felt like the perfect place to begin the next chapter of her life. At first, the transition was not easy. She had to adapt to a new country, a new culture, and a completely different lifestyle. But she refused to give up. Using her experience in modeling, she quickly found opportunities and started building a life in Los Angeles. She was no longer just someone with a dream. She was someone who was making that dream happen. But there was still one thing missing. Liviana wanted more than just a career. She wanted a family. She wanted a place where she truly belonged. And then she met Blake. They met at a party. According to people who knew them, Blake stood out immediately. He was not the loudest person in the room. He was quiet, reserved, almost disconnected from the crowd around him. But something about him caught Iana's attention. Soon, the two began dating, and their relationship moved quickly. To Iana, Blake seemed like the perfect partner. He came from a wealthy family. He was educated, he was creative, and he appeared to genuinely care about her. For someone who had traveled thousands of miles to build a new life, Blake represented stability. Not long after, they became engaged, and eventually they welcomed a daughter into the world. For Iana, everything seemed to finally come together. She had left Ukraine. She had chased her dream. She had built a new life in America. Now she had a loving partner, a beautiful child, and a future she believed was secure. To everyone around them, they looked like the perfect family. But sometimes, the most dangerous situations do not begin with obvious warning signs. They begin with trust, because the person who appears closest to you is sometimes the person you know the least. As investigators would later discover, the image of this perfect family was slowly falling apart behind closed doors. And the man who seemed to give Iana everything she wanted would eventually become the center of a horrifying investigation. To the people around him, Blake seemed like the kind of person who had everything. He was born into a wealthy family. His father was a successful businessman. His mother came from a family with significant financial resources. From the outside, Blake had every advantage: money, education, connections, and opportunities most people could only dream about. But behind that successful image, Blake was not someone who simply relied on his family's wealth. He wanted to create something of his own. He was interested in filmmaking, he loved comics, and he wanted to build a career as a creator. He tried to establish his own identity. To many people, this made him appear even more impressive. He was not just a wealthy man, he was someone with ambition, someone with talent, someone who seemed to have a clear future. But as investigators later discovered, success on the outside does not always mean stability on the inside. Blake's childhood was not as perfect as his adult life appeared. When he was young, his parents' relationship began to fall apart. Eventually, the family was divided. Blake became distant from some members of his family, especially his relationship with his father. Over the years, resentment continued to build. Later, after his mother passed away, another conflict emerged. The issue involved the family inheritance. Blake believed he deserved more, but the final arrangement did not match his expectations. The disagreement created even more tension between him and his family. People close to him began noticing that Blake had a complicated personality. He could be charming, he could be friendly, he could make people feel comfortable around him. But when things did not go according to his expectations, his emotions could change dramatically. This pattern also appeared in his relationships. Before meeting Iana, Blake had already experienced a failed marriage. He had once built a family, but over time, the relationship became filled with conflict. The two eventually separated. Then Iana entered his life. At first, everything seemed different. Blake gave her the attention and affection she wanted. He provided financial support. He made her feel protected. For Iana, who had moved thousands of miles away from Ukraine, this relationship represented a fresh start. She believed she had found someone who could give her the stable family she always wanted. But relationships often reveal their problems slowly. After their daughter was born, the dynamic between them began to change. A newborn child naturally becomes the center of attention. Iana's time and energy were focused on caring for the baby. For most parents, this is simply part of building a family. But investigators later believed that Blake struggled with this change. He was no longer the only important person in Iana's life. The attention he once received was now shared with their child, and this created deeper tension inside the relationship. At the same time, people close to the family noticed more signs of instability. Blake could become controlling. His emotions could become unpredictable, and his behavior inside relationships was different from the image he showed to others. Iana's mother, Olga, was one of the first people to notice something was wrong. When Olga came from Ukraine to help care for the newborn baby, she spent more time around the couple, and she began seeing a side of Blake that others rarely saw. He was not always the gentle and successful man everyone believed him to be. There were moments when his behavior made her uncomfortable. Olga wanted her daughter to be careful. She wanted Iana to recognize the problems in the relationship, but Iana still believed in the life they had built together, because for her, this was not just a relationship. This was the life she had crossed an ocean to create. She had left her home country, she had built a career, she had created a family. Admitting that something was wrong meant admitting that the dream she fought for might not be what she thought it was, and that was something she was not ready to accept. But in May 2016, everything changed. The relationship that once looked like a success story would become the center of a criminal investigation, and the question investigators needed to answer was this a sudden tragedy, or had the warning signs been there all along? May 25, 2016. Los Angeles, California. For Iana's mother, Olga, something felt wrong. Her daughter had suddenly stopped responding. No phone calls, no messages, no updates. At first, Olga tried to convince herself that everything was fine. Maybe Iana was busy taking care of the baby. Maybe her phone was somewhere else. Maybe she simply needed some rest. But deep down, Olga knew her daughter. Iana was a new mother. Her newborn daughter was the most important thing in her life. She would never disappear without telling her family. So Olga made a decision. She was going to find out what happened herself. She contacted a friend and went to Iana's apartment in West Hollywood. When they arrived, they noticed something important. Iana's car was still there. That meant she had not simply driven away. Olga immediately felt a sense of fear. She walked to the apartment door. She knocked. No answer. She knocked again. Still nothing. The apartment was silent. But then she noticed something strange. Someone appeared to be inside. That person was Blake, Iana's partner. Olga called his name. She asked him to open the door. She wanted to know if her daughter was safe, but Blake did not respond. Instead, the apartment remained completely quiet. Then something even more unusual happened. The window closed. For Olga, this was the moment when concern turned into panic. If everything was normal, why would he refuse to open the door? If Iana was safe, why was nobody answering? She immediately contacted police. When officers arrived, they began a preliminary investigation. At that moment, however, they still did not know they were standing in front of a murder case. They believed they were dealing with a missing person. The information they had was limited. A woman was missing. Her boyfriend was inside, and the boyfriend was not cooperating. Police attempted to contact Blake, but they received little response. They tried to understand what was happening inside the apartment, but without clear evidence of a crime, they had limited options. The first police visit did not immediately reveal the truth, but Olga refused to give up. She continued trying to contact her daughter. She sent messages. She called repeatedly. She waited for any sign that Iana was okay, but there was no response. Days began passing, and the questions became harder to ignore. Why was Iana's phone still showing activity? Why were there signs that someone was still living inside the apartment? Why was Blake acting like someone trying to avoid attention instead of someone searching for his missing partner? Investigators began looking closer. They discovered that Iana's phone had been active after she was believed to have disappeared. There were also records showing that food deliveries had been made to the apartment. Someone inside had received them. This changed the situation completely, because now police knew one thing. Someone was inside the apartment. But that person was refusing to explain what happened. The investigation moved forward. Police reviewed available information. They examined the timeline. They looked into the relationship between Iana and Blake. And slowly, a disturbing possibility began to emerge. Maybe Iana did not leave. Maybe she never left the apartment at all. Police eventually obtained access to the home. And when they entered, the case changed forever. The place that was supposed to represent love and family became the center of a criminal investigation. The evidence inside would reveal that this was not a simple disappearance. It was a carefully hidden tragedy, and the person investigators needed to focus on was the same person who had been closest to Iana, her partner, Blake. When police entered the apartment, the entire direction of the investigation changed. At first, everyone believed they were looking for a missing woman, a daughter, a mother, a young woman who had suddenly disappeared. But inside that apartment, investigators began finding signs that told a very different story. This was not a woman who simply walked away. something had happened inside that home. From the outside, the apartment looked ordinary. There was no obvious sign of chaos, no dramatic scene, no clear explanation of what had happened. And that was exactly what made investigators suspicious. Because experienced detectives know something important. A crime scene does not always look like a crime scene. Sometimes, the most important evidence is hidden in the smallest details. Police began carefully examining every part of the apartment. They studied the layout, the position of objects, the condition of the rooms, and anything that could help rebuild the timeline. The first question investigators needed to answer was simple. What happened inside this apartment? Because every piece of evidence had to answer one thing. Was Iana still alive when she disappeared? As detectives continued their investigation, they discovered several details that raised more questions. The timeline provided by Blake did not match the information collected by investigators. His explanation about what happened after Iana disappeared became harder to believe. If she had left voluntarily, why were her personal belongings still there? If she was safe somewhere else, why was there no record proving it? And if Blake truly wanted to help find her, why did his actions appear so different from what investigators expected? Detectives began looking more closely at Blake himself. In missing person cases, the closest people to the victim are often the first people investigators examine, not because they are always responsible, but because they usually know the victim's habits, relationships, and daily routine better than anyone else. In Iana's case, Blake was the last person known to have been with her, and his behavior after her disappearance became one of the biggest questions in the investigation. Investigators also began examining physical evidence connected to the apartment. They collected samples, reviewed records, and compared every piece of information with the timeline Blake provided. Slowly, the story Blake told began falling apart. The evidence suggested that the apartment was not simply the last place Iana had been seen. It was likely the place where the tragedy began. Another important part of the investigation was understanding the relationship between Iana and Blake. Police looked into their communication, their personal problems, and the conflicts that existed before her disappearance. They discovered that their relationship had been under increasing pressure. There were disagreements, emotional tension, and unresolved problems. These details helped investigators understand something important. The case was not about a stranger attacking a random victim. It was about a relationship that had slowly changed over time, a relationship where trust had started to break down. As more evidence was collected, the investigators began building a complete picture. The person who knew Iana best, the person who lived with her, the person who should have been helping find her, was becoming the center of the investigation. Blake, the man who appeared to have everything, a wealthy background, a successful family, a newborn child, was now facing a completely different reality. The investigation was no longer asking, where did Iana go? The question had changed to, what happened to Iana inside her own home? And as detectives continued searching for answers, they uncovered a darker truth about the man behind the perfect image, a truth that would reveal the hidden side of Blake's personality. As investigators continued examining Blake's life, they realized that this case was not only about what happened inside the apartment. It was also about understanding the person behind the crime, because the biggest question remained, how could someone who appeared to have everything become responsible for destroying his own family? On the surface, Blake seemed like a successful man. He came from a wealthy background, he had access to opportunities, he had a creative career, and he was building a family of his own. To outsiders, his life looked privileged, but investigators discovered that wealth and success did not necessarily mean emotional stability. Behind the image of confidence, there were years of personal struggles and unresolved conflicts. Blake grew up in a family with complicated relationships. His parents separated when he was young, and his relationship with his father became increasingly distant over the years. That conflict never fully disappeared. Later in life, another major disagreement developed inside the family. After his mother passed away, questions surrounding inheritance created more tension. Blake believed he deserved more, but the final outcome did not match his expectations. The disagreement deepened his resentment toward his family. Investigators later looked at these experiences as possible factors that shaped his personality, not as an excuse for his actions, but as part of understanding the person behind the crime. People who knew Blake described him as someone with two very different sides. He could be intelligent, creative, charming. He could make people feel comfortable around him. But when situations did not go according to his expectations, his behavior could change. This pattern also appeared in his relationships. Blake wanted to feel important. He wanted to feel in control. But when reality did not match his expectations, conflict would appear. Before meeting Iana, Blake had already experienced a failed marriage. He had once built a family, but eventually that relationship collapsed. Then Iana entered his life. He was supportive. He seemed capable of providing the stable future she wanted. For someone who had moved thousands of miles from Ukraine, this relationship represented security. But investigators later discovered that the relationship was far more complicated than it appeared. After their daughter was born, the balance inside the family changed. Iana naturally focused more attention on their child. For a healthy family, this is completely normal. But investigators believed Blake struggled with losing that attention. He was no longer the center of Iana's world. The relationship that once made him feel valued was changing. At the same time, financial pressure and personal problems continued to grow. Investigators learned that Blake had struggled with issues, including gambling and emotional instability. These problems created more tension inside his life. Meanwhile, Iana's mother, Olga, began noticing warning signs. After moving to Los Angeles to help with the newborn baby, she spent more time around the couple. She started seeing things that worried her. The man who appeared successful and confident in public was not always the same person inside the home. Olga wanted her daughter to be careful. She hoped Iana would recognize the problems in the relationship, but Iana continued believing in the family she had built. Because leaving was not just about ending a relationship, it meant admitting that the dream she had spent years creating might not have been real. After the investigation began, police also examined another side of Blake's personality, his creative work. Blake had always been interested in dark stories, crime, violence, and psychological themes. For many people, creating dark fiction is simply a form of imagination. Our writer can explore terrible events without wanting them to happen in real life. But investigators were interested in something different. They wanted to understand how Blake viewed the world. How did he see relationships? How did he deal with conflict? How did he react when he felt powerless? Because the most important question was not only, what did he do? It was, what allowed him to believe he could do it? The investigation revealed a pattern, a person who wanted control, a person who struggled with rejection, a person who could present one image to the world while hiding another side completely. And that was what made this case so disturbing. The danger did not come from a stranger. It came from someone who was supposed to be the closest person in Iana's life, the person she trusted, the person she built a family with, and the person investigators now believed was responsible for taking everything away from her. As investigators continued digging into Blake's past, they discovered another side of his life that many people had never seen. Before becoming the center of a murder investigation, Blake had always been fascinated by dark stories, crime, violence, human psychology. These themes appeared repeatedly throughout his creative work. To many people, this would not necessarily be unusual. After all, many writers and filmmakers create stories about crime and darkness. Creating dark fiction does not mean someone wants those things to happen in real life. But in this case, investigators were not simply looking at his work. They were trying to understand his mindset. They wanted to know what kind of person was Blake behind the public image. For years, Blake had tried to build a career as a creator. He worked on films. He wrote stories. He explored disturbing and complicated characters. One of his most well-known creative projects was a dark graphic novel. The story focused on extreme emotions, pain, fear, and the darker side of human behavior. At first glance, it was simply a fictional story, but after the investigation began, people started looking at his work differently. Some details appeared strangely similar to ideas found in the case. This did not prove that his creative work caused his actions, but it raised another important question. Did his fictional world reveal something about the way he viewed reality? Criminal investigators often study a suspect's background, not because hobbies or interests automatically predict crime, but because a person's thoughts, relationships, and behavior patterns can sometimes reveal important information. In Blake's case, investigators focused on his relationship with control. Throughout his life, Blake seemed to struggle with situations where he felt powerless. When things went according to his expectations, he appeared calm and confident, but when he felt rejected, ignored, or challenged, his behavior could change. This pattern became important during the investigation, because detectives believed the crime was not simply caused by one moment. Instead, it may have been the result of years of unresolved problems, family conflicts, emotional instability, relationship issues, and a desire to maintain control. All of these factors created a dangerous combination. Investigators also examined Blake's actions after Iana disappeared. They believed his behavior showed planning rather than simple panic. He did not act like someone who had lost the person he loved. Instead, his actions appeared focused on protecting himself. This became one of the most important parts of the prosecution's argument, because criminal cases are not only about what happened, they are also about understanding the choices a person made afterward. The investigation revealed a disturbing contrast. The man people saw in public was not necessarily the same person who existed behind closed doors. To friends and strangers, Blake appeared intelligent, creative, and successful. But inside his personal life, investigators discovered a much more complicated personality. A person who wanted control, a person who struggled when life changed, a person who created an image of success while hiding deeper problems. And that contrast became one of the most shocking parts of the case, because sometimes the most difficult crimes to understand are not committed by people who look dangerous. They are committed by people who appear completely normal, people who have families, careers, and a reputation others trust. In the end, investigators believe the answer was not hidden in one single moment. It was hidden in years of choices about relationships, choices about responsibility, choices about how someone responds when life stops following their plan. By 2018, the case finally moved into the courtroom. And now, after years of investigation, a jury would have to decide, was Blake responsible for what happened? Or was there another explanation? The final answer would come inside a courtroom. In 2018, after years of investigation, the case finally reached the courtroom. For Iana's mother, Olga, this moment had been years in the making. She had spent countless days searching for answers. Why did her daughter disappear? Why did the person who promised to protect her become the person accused of destroying her life? Now, those questions would be examined in court. When the trial began, Blake continued to deny responsibility. His defense team argued that the evidence did not prove what prosecutors claimed. They attempted to create doubt. They questioned the investigation. They challenged the timeline. But prosecutors believed the evidence told a different story. They presented a series of details that connected Blake to the crime. The evidence from the apartment, the timeline of events, the relationship problems before Iana disappeared, and Blake's actions afterward. Prosecutors argued that these were not separate pieces of information together. They formed a complete picture, a picture of a man who was not simply a witness to a tragedy, but someone at the center of it. During the trial, one question became especially important. Who was the real Blake? Was he the successful businessman from a wealthy family, the creative person who wanted to build a career, the father who appeared to love his child, or was there another side hidden behind that image? The prosecution argued that the problems in Blake's life did not happen suddenly. They pointed to years of emotional struggles, family conflicts, relationship problems, and a pattern of wanting control. They argued that these issues did not excuse his actions. Instead, they helped explain the mindset behind them. For the jury, the case was not only about evidence, it was also about understanding behavior. Because one of the most difficult questions in criminal cases is, how does someone who appears normal commit an unimaginable act? After reviewing the evidence and hearing testimony from both sides, the jury reached a decision. They found Blake guilty. The court sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For Olga, the verdict brought a sense of justice. But it could never bring back what she had lost. No sentence could return her daughter. No courtroom decision could erase the pain of losing a child. After everything that happened, Olga became the person responsible for raising Iana's daughter. The child who lost her mother at such a young age. Eventually, Olga returned to Ukraine with her granddaughter for her. It was a way to return to the place where Iana's story had begun, and to build a new life after a tragedy that changed everything. The case officially ended in court, but the questions it raised remained. Because this was not only a story about a crime, it was also a story about trust. About how someone can appear loving and successful on the outside, while hiding serious problems underneath. Iana came to America searching for a better future. She wanted a new life, a family, a place where she belonged. But the person she trusted the most became the person who took everything away. This case reminds us of something important. Danger does not always come from strangers. Sometimes, it comes from the person standing closest to us, the person we believe we know, the person we trust. And that is what makes this case so disturbing, because behind the image of a perfect family, there was a hidden truth waiting to be revealed. This was the story of Iana's case, a story about love, trust, and the darkness that can exist behind a perfect-looking life.